we'll do the live thing first. Like. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you want to ever reach out to the podcast, feel free to hit us up in our DMs on Instagram or on our Twitter at the Bigmark Podcast or at the Bigmark Pod. Like and subscribe to the channels wherever you're listening. If you're watching on YouTube, like the video and please subscribe to our channel, and so you know when our next videos are coming out. And if you do want to support the podcast, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. There's a few different levels to choose from. And again, if you can, please share and rate and do all that fun stuff and spread the word to the Bigmark podcast and let everyone know. Like you say, you know, I've said this before, we cover a broad spectrum of subjects, and I do that because not only am I interested in all those subjects, but I also like to bring people that maybe not necessarily would, like, they might never get together under normal circumstances, but they might come in and watch this podcast and realize that, wow, I have the same interests as a lot of the people that I didn't realize, or whatever it is. It's all about connection. It's all about bringing people together. And today's episode I'm super excited about because it's a great band. It's a band that I've waited a while to talk about on the podcast, but I just felt like it was right. It was the right time, and they're one of these bands that they don't always get name checked as one of the great bands of all time, even though their three main members, the members that were part of the band for the longest, were all individually considered one of the best musician at their instrument. And it's really cool that not only are they Canadian, but again, you know, Zeppelin's been overanalyzed, the Beatles have been overanalyzed, everyone talks about those, but when you're going through all these different great bands, you don't always think of Rush. And Rush is a tremendous band hailing from Toronto, Ontario. They were formed in 1968. And their very original lineup, Rush, the original, was John Rutsey on drums, Jeff Jones the bass player, and Alex Lifeson played guitar. And Geddy Lee, who becomes the bass player for the rest of the band, and along with Alex Lifeson on guitar, Geddy Lee replaced Jeff Jones, and then John Rutsey was later replaced by Neil Peart. And then Neil, Alex, and Geddy stayed together for the rest of their careers, which was about about 45 more years after Neil joined the band. And Alex and Geddy were very, very close friends before the band even began. They grew up in Willowdale, the Willowdale neighborhood in Toronto. All my peoples in Toronto that are listening, you know that neighborhood. But nice little suburb of the city. Were both born, Alex and Geddy were both born to immigrant parents. Alex's parents were from Yugoslavia. They left the turmoil that was happening there, and then Geddy's parents were Jewish as well, and they were Holocaust survivors. And sadly, Geddy's father passed away when he was very young, and it kind of left Geddy like being the man of the house. And who knows exactly what brought them together, but Alex and Geddy became kind of instant friends as soon as they met. I believe they met in high school, but as soon as they met, they just became like super, super tight friends. And it's really cool to see how they've been able to create a career where they can hang out together all the time. And that's always really cool to see. And Neil Peart, you know, he's obviously a friend of theirs, but in one of these great documentaries, which I'll mention later, that cover the band, and in their history, they talk about Neil still as the new guy in the band, because Neil joined at least after their first album. So they had been together for quite a long time and like really cut their teeth together before Neil Peart. Even though they went on to be together for 45 years, they still looked at Neil as the new guy. And Neil Peart was born in Hagersville, Ontario. He was technically born in Hamilton. Shout out Hamilton. I think he was at the General Hospital or St. Joe's or something like that. And then his family moved to Port Dalhousie, which is like just outside of St. Catharines here in Ontario. And he, like I said, he joined the band after their first album. So he was like working at his dad's hardware store and things. And then the band was looking for a new drummer, and they found him. But the reason they even got to that place why they were looking for a drummer is so when the band first started playing, like I said, they were playing for a few years before Neil ever even came on the scene. And the reason, or the original drummer, John Rutsey, like I had mentioned before, was obviously playing with them. And back in the 70s, or in the late 60s when they formed in 68, the drinking age was 21 in Ontario. So they had to play high schools all the time. They had to play like high school dances, and that's like where a lot of bands played, because that's where, you know, kids that were 18, 19, still in high school with like OAC and all that shit, grade 13, they were still in you know, they were in school, but they were like getting older and they wanted to have fun, and high schools would have dances and have cool bands, like actual current bands, and come and play. But Rush's music was not necessarily the best music to dance to, so that was always funny. I'm sure for the band, just playing to people and them not really knowing what to do, even though the tunes were solid. And it was like very blues rock, heavily blues inspired rock and roll. And in 1971, the drinking age was lowered from 21 to 18, and that essentially made the band like going and playing in bars now 6 days a week. Like they were like a full-on working band. And after they recorded their first album, then they were touring it and playing it hard. John Rutsey, their drummer, unfortunately has diabetes, and he was like not in really good shape and was drinking hard, you know, having a good time as a young musician do. And he unfortunately, like, I don't think they had to kick him out. I think it was kind of one of those things. I'm not sure who brought it up at the end of the day, but where it was kind of like, hey, John, like, if we go out on tour again, like, you're not going to make it. And I'm sure he realized that too. And it's sad because he was one of the founding members, but again, he had to leave, and the band auditioned 5 drummers and ended up landing on Neil. And it was a good decision because he's arguably one of rock's greatest drummers. So they think they made a good decision there. Again, Rush is one of those bands that I really like. I really respect them because they're one of these bands that throughout their careers, they really did change things up. They really did alter their sound, and you know, they talk about it in their songs even, but like they reference how music has changed and how technology has changed, but there's still something cool that lives in that technology, and you can use it as a tool, you know, as every musician has ever done with their instrument. It's just a tool to create something new so the artist can use it, but your creativity can flow through it in any ways. But again, you know, there are bands out there, obviously, that are very successful, that have basically found their sound and they stick with it, and they basically do like selling the same thing over and over to people that you've just like repackaged and repurposed is maybe a little bit like a skeezy way to look at it, but it takes a skill and it takes a certain type of creativity to even be able to do that. You know, even understanding what people like and knowing what they like and being able to give them something new is, as far as like the music business is concerned, if you look at it as a business, as a money-making machine, which there's part of music, the professional music scene, that's what it is. If you look at it that way, that's the best way to have music, is you create or sorry, it's the best way to sell music, I should say, is you create something that you know people are going to like. So you've done your market research, or you just have a knack for figuring it out. That takes a certain skill. So good for those artists. But again, if you want to be, maintain artistic integrity and such, you can kind of look at that like that maybe they sold out a little bit. But again, a band that can change their sound and come up with a new song, and I'm not saying necessarily like they've completely reinvented themselves, but a new album here or there might have different songs on it that go away from things. And unfortunately, what happens sometimes with those bands, even though I respect them, I feel a lot of people do, if you change and you go in the wrong direction, you run the risk of losing a fucking big chunk of your audience. And that's obviously a concern of every band, right? And that's, I think, why bands teeter-totter on that line of, I want to keep my fans happy, and they really liked this album, this one album that I wrote, and it was great. And if I just basically do that again, they'll probably like it because they heard it already, right? But maybe they heard it already, so they don't want to hear it again. So again, this is the teeter-totter. This is the mind of the artist, where you're just trying to constantly, temper or titrate the way that you put out your music, because you don't want to lose a bunch of people. But Rush inevitably didn't give a fuck about that, which is great. And like I said, I respect it, because they went in some certain directions that they kind of cleaved off major chunks of their audience, but it was because they made music that they wanted and they liked. And that's what I love about them. And that's what I respect. And that's what I take in as a musician, that if you're doing something that you love, and or you're happy with your own music taste, which I hope you are, and you make music that satisfies that, or you like, again, if you like the music that you make, other people are probably going to like it. Yeah, maybe not everybody in the world will like it, and it would be nice to be the fucking Beatles or Elvis or somebody that everybody knows, because again, yeah, you're going to make a lot of money. But again, if you're not in this to make money, or even if you are in it to make money, be in it to make money, but understand that it doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what you put in. Like, a hit is a hit, and yeah, you can do all the calculations and go to Clive Davis and whoever the fuck, and they can tell you this or that, but there's no guarantees, and you never know how long the thing's going to run. And again, yeah, you can bring up a million bands that maybe have had longer careers than anything, but they're lucky, because there's 10 times, 20, 30, 50 times more bands that have fucking failed and didn't make it, or just the wrong time, or they got with the wrong label and someone fucked them over, or they didn't give a shit, or they had some performance anxiety, or they just couldn't fucking hack it in the studio, whatever it is. Again, if you're listening for the first time, I always talk about how sports and music are so alike. And I talk about, if you can't hack it in the studio, it reminds me of, I remember playing with guys, playing football in university. I remember playing with dudes that were unbelievable players on the field. Unbelievable. Technique, tremendous. Skill, tremendous. Like, awareness, tremendous. Everything just on point. It was like they just had a feel for the game, and you couldn't coach that. And it was wicked, and it was a beautiful thing to see that level of athleticism. But then to see them go to the CFL Combine or wherever and get tested and fuck up, it was really hard to watch, because you just give them a fucking chance on the field and they'll fucking show you what you got. But you put people under a microscope, and it's kind of like that. What is it? What principle is he even fucking explaining? So there's on some podcast, I think it's like the double slit experiment, and the idea that you're observing an experiment happening, and you're the observer itself actually changes the outcome of the experiment. And he likens it to if you're trying to reach a coin in a couch, like in between the cushions, and you're reaching down. As you reach down, the cushions part and the coin gets further away. So as you are probing the experiment, that probe itself, if you're using some type of machine to look at it, even if it's like a microscope or something like magnetron bullshit, you're actually affecting the environment potentially, or it's not to get too woo-woo on it, but that your intention and your attention and intention to the subject of study actually changes its behavior somehow. Now, that can happen, I think, when you put someone under a microscope, and that's what I think happened to someone I played with. But I think that can also happen to bands and stuff when you put them under the microscope, or you put them in a pressure situation. It's what it is. It's you being put in a pressure situation where you're being looked at, you're being scrutinized, and that's not easy for everybody. And like I said, there's a million bands out there that have made it, or that haven't made it. But with Rush changing their style up, like, again, they basically went through this whole motif of like, we're going to be like a fucking keyboard band. And it fucking pissed Alex Lifeson off, because all of a sudden Geddy Lee is singing, drumming, He's doing triple duty, but he's playing keyboard so much that Alex Lifeson didn't really find a place, because keyboards and guitar kind of live in the same like musical environment. So Geddy's playing keyboard, singing, playing bass, going nuts over there, and then Alex has to figure out all types of shit to try and fit in, and it was, a point of friction for everybody. But again, that's fucking what happens. Especially when you try to tread new ground. Sometimes you go off like a fucking cliff a little bit, and you go into the fucking rocky areas a little bit, and you got to fucking steer it back on, and that's cool. When you're a band together for 45 years and have all the albums that Rush has, you've obviously found a way to make it work over the years. And not only did they change in their music writing as a band and came out with new things, but as artists themselves, they changed too. And Neil Peart, again, like I said, one of the best drummers of all time, went back during his career, like halfway through, probably, more than halfway through his career, went to a drum teacher, and he basically went to like the Yoda of drum teachers, like this guru, and completely relearned drums and like a new technique, and came back in. And again, in this documentary that I continue to cite, which is great, there's a scene where Neil is talking about when he came back to the band after, they probably took a little bit of a hiatus while Neil was like doing this fucking revamp of his technique. When he came back to the band and they started playing, he started playing, the band was like, oh yeah, it sounds great. Like, it sounds like Neil. But as soon as they started playing with him, it was like a whole different clock and like a different inner rhythm so he completely changed his drumming style. And you got to respect that, because again, even at the time, like I say, he's one of the best drummers of all time. I'm saying that today, and that's unarguable. But even back then, people were saying he was one of the best. So to have that really cool perspective, at least, and the lack of ego to say, hey, I can get better, and I can always be better, even though I'm in a successful professional band. So that's awesome. Again, like I said, they've done many albums, but I just kind of wanted to mention a few of my favorites. And some of them are kind of cliche, but if you've never got into the band, I would suggest checking out some of these. I have some songs too that I'll mention. So if you've never heard of the band, and you're still listening, thank you. But if you have heard of the band, we can reminisce together because some of these are awesome. Fly By Night's great album. It was like the first album with Neil Peart behind the kit, getting after it. Moving Pictures, of course, like I said, a little cliche, but excellent album. A lot of hits on that one. Definitely a little bit more pop friendly, but wicked stuff. Hemispheres, great album, a little bit more conceptual. Again, when you look through Rush's career, their discography, that you can see kind of the ebbs and flows, and kind of is like they do 2 to 3 albums in like a certain style, or you can kind of tell how their one album is moving in a certain direction, taking them towards that. And Hemispheres definitely does that, going towards 2112, which is another kind of conceptual album, which is really cool. Snakes and Arrows, which is an awesome, or it's a great album that came out when I was in high school, and me and my buddy Frank Despon, what's up, Frank? We listened to that when that first came out. We were so stoked, and I think it was around the time when I was in high school, went to a Catholic high school. Shout out St. Mary's. We did this thing called the 40-hour famine, and it was like a fast thing that you could do, and it gave you like mad community service hours. So you had to do a certain amount of community service hours in Hamilton to be able to graduate. I'm pretty sure that was across all Catholic schools in Ontario, at least. You had to do a bunch of communities, I think 40 or something community service hours before you like graduated. It was just like nice incentive for kids to get involved in the community and what have you. And this 40-hour famine, you like legitimately like stayed over at school, and you couldn't eat for 40 hours. I think it worked out to be 40 because like you'd stop. Yeah, it wasn't 48 obviously, so it wasn't like the full 2 days, but you didn't fucking eat. You could drink water and shit, and they had like this fucking juice kind of Gatorade-ish drink, mixed powder drink that you could fucking get after. That was fun. We would play fucking Lord of the Rings Risk with one of my teachers, Mr. Davies. Shout out Mr. Davies. But Frank and I were listening to that album during that famine, which was tons of fun. I remember being in like a classroom randomly in the school, because you're there at night, which is such a trippy thing to be in school, because you're never there at night. Well, unless it's like basketball and you're by the gym. Anyway, Grace Under Pressure, another great album overall. But one of the songs on that, which will segue nicely into some of my favorite songs, which aren't necessarily, part of albums that I necessarily like every song. But on Grace Under Pressure, there's a song called Distant Early Warning. And I love it. It's a great song, but it always brings up this little fucking pang of terror, because it always used to come on the radio when I was going to basketball practice with me and my buddy, and his dad would drive us. And we always listened to the same radio station. And you know how radio stations do the same fucking songs over and over again. We got used to it. It was a fucking Pavlovian response, man. We got used to these songs, because I talked to my buddy about this too, and he felt the exact same way. We would hear these songs in succession, and we'd get closer to the fucking gym, and we'd know, and practice was so fucking hard because we had like, it was just an intense ass team. Our coaches were intense, and it was like, hardcore practice, and it was great, but we were so fucking stressed. And every time I hear it's like that song, and then there's like I think it's Saga. Winding my peak, can't stop, he keeps on going round the clock. That fucking song. Oh, that one fucking kills me too. Every time. Pavlovian response, craziness. But Distant Early Warning, great song. Among many great songs, Lakeside Park, phenomenal. It's actually written after an actual park in St. Catharines, Ontario. Close to the Heart, can't go wrong. Obviously, some of these are a little bit more cliche. Tom Sawyer, Subdivisions, great song. That always reminds me of my stepmom Andrea. When I was learning to drive a car, we drove around like subdivisions in Aurelia, and we'd always think of that song, which is awesome. New World Man, another great song. Another great song. I don't know. It's not off Gray's number. Anyway, New World Man, tremendous. La Via Strangiato, really cool song off Hemispheres. If you haven't heard that one in a while, check it out. Beautiful, excellent, masterful drumming. I think Vinny, what the hell's his name? Oh my gosh, the drummer from... Shit. I'm sorry, I can't remember, but one of the great drummers that have played. Oh, fuck, he was Dimebag Darrell's brother, Mancini or something like that. Sorry, buddy. Anyway, he's a great drummer who's very famous. Talks about La Via Strangiato as one of the great songs to learn as a drummer who's learning the craft. You know, yeah, you can play YYZ, which is a great Rush song, and which is excellent on drums as well. But La Via Strangiato is just masterful, beautiful masterclass, truly in drumming. And like I said before, Hemispheres walked so 2012 could run, and that kind of conceptual album thing was an interesting phase for Rush to go through, but they kind of got out of that after those two albums. And one of my favorite songs, but also one of Neil Peart's favorite songs that the band does, is called Animate, and it's a really, really interesting song. It's off their Counterparts album, I believe. Anyway, really cool song. Check that one out. Check out all those songs. Check out all those albums. Like I said, if you've never heard the band, check them out. And even if you have, and you haven't heard these songs, because, you know, Rush sadly was kind of considered like a nerd band. You know, they didn't have a lot of female fans, and it was a lot of kind of nerdy guys that were into Neil's lyrics because Neil's lyrics were super deep. And, you know, he was a special guy. You know, not too many drummers are the main writers of the band. And basically the dynamic of the band was Neil wrote the lyrics, and then Alex and Geddy wrote like the music, obviously apart from the drums. And what made it cool was he was such a prolific reader. He was always reading books, and his lyrics were so deep and amazing. It attracted kind of more nerdy, intelligent people, and it didn't always attract everyone kind of because of that, because your music taste, especially, you know, it's a big part of people's identities nowadays. Don't get me wrong. But there's so much music available at all times because of streaming. If you have an eclectic taste or you're into some of that stuff, it doesn't make you weird. People are like, why the fuck you listen to that? Yeah, as much as I don't like new country, I should I should say this, or y'all should take this with a grain of salt, but I don't judge people who listen to that stuff. I just don't like the music. You get whatever. Fuck, obviously, listen to the music you want to listen to. But it's a different approach nowadays. Back in the day, your music choice was pretty serious choice. So not everyone was necessarily into Rush back then. That might be into them now. And again, it's been so long, you got to give them a chance. So check out all those albums, check out all those songs. Super cool. But Neil Peart himself, you know, is kind of a really special guy, right? Like, you know, not only for his drumming, and, you know, the band stayed together for fucking 50 years, basically. So he's obviously a really cool guy. Again, for sure known as one of the greatest drummers of all time. There's this awesome YouTube clip of him playing at a Buddy Rich memorial concert. And he's like playing like traditional jazz drums with a big band, and it is fucking super cool. But the guy has had a really interesting life, and, you know, he's so intellectual, and he seems to always be thinking about things. And, you know, you always worry about those people because you think when something happens to them, they're so cerebral, like how much are they going to get in their own head? And sadly, Neil Peart's daughter, and his daughter died in a car accident, and his wife died of an illness, like within like about 3 or 4 months of each other. His daughter was, you know, older, I think in her teens or early 20s, and she died in a car accident, and then the wife passed soon after, and it just obviously shattered Neil. And he went on a motorcycle trip. He got on a motorcycle and just fucking dipset like Che. He fucking got on the road, and he basically did like the whole loop of South America, like the whole rim of South America, just like on his motorcycle. He said he could put his helmet on, no one would recognize him. He could go in little fucking hovels and little back fucking country shits, and no one would ever notice him. And he just read and drove, and fuck, who knows, man? Who knows what kind of journey that was? And again, you know, he was very, very, very private person. You know, he anytime the band would do kind of like meet and greet stuff, it was mainly just like Geddy and Alex. Neil wasn't always involved. Even when Rush was in the Trailer Park Boys, Neil was not really in it. He was playing the drums when they did the concert, but that's it. So he's just a reserved private guy. Who knows why he turned that down? I've never really put a lot of thought into that, but he probably thought it was too lowbrow. But what are you going to do? But again, it's a tough life, and he went through such tragedy, and Geddy and Alex essentially thought the band was done. But Neil came back slowly and said, hey, like, let's get back to doing this, and came in with a new technique, and they went strong. They went really strong until 2020. Sadly, Neil Peart died of glioblastoma, and because of his privacy and the way he liked it, it kind of felt like it came out of the blue. And it's one of my major regrets. Seriously, one of my major regrets in life is not going to see Rush when I had a chance. I kind of always thought that they'd just be around. Not always, but I thought they'd be here forever. And I thought about that, about the Tragically Hip too. So I've really reconsidered about some of these bands where I'm like, if I don't see them now, I'm never going to see them as a whole. Even though sometimes a ticket costs an arm and a fucking leg. I still majorly regret that, but it's sad because obviously the band is now done. I don't think they're going to keep playing ever. But glioblastoma took Neil, just the same brain cancer that killed Gord Downey as well. The documentary I have mentioned a bunch of times tonight, Rush, Beyond the Lighted Stage. Tremendous. Again, a lot of the information I talked about tonight I got from that. Go check that out. Directed by Sam Dunn, who also did Metal, A Headbanger's Journey, which I've mentioned before. Really cool movie. I actually went to the Hamilton premiere of that, and Sam Dunn spoke at that, which was fucking awesome. Again, if you've never heard them, or if you did listen to them, great. And if you did listen to them and you didn't like them, give them another chance. Listen to some of those songs that I mentioned. Check them out. And I want to leave you with a quote or a line of lyrics from one of my favorite songs, which is called "The Spirit of Radio" that Rush does. And it's one of those lines where I feel it totally encapsulates like a way that you can portray an idea to your audience and not necessarily sound pretentious, but it's a large idea, and doesn't seem like it's like cutting at anybody, but it touches on a really interesting thought. And it's one likes to believe in the freedom of music, and glittering prizes and endless compromises shatter the illusion of integrity. And I feel like that's one of those ideas that, you can look to the stars and you can see these ideas and all this money and all this fame and stuff. And I think that totally encapsulates Rush's whole approach to music, because they go, listen, you can take all that money and all that gold in the world and you'll sell yourself for that. But it completely shatters the idea that you are giving yourself to the music and completely serving the music and doing what you want to do. And I think Rush completely lived up to that, and I love that quote. And there's many other quotes, but again, Neil Peart, prolific lyricist, amazing musician, rest in peace. All those guys. Geddy Lee, great bass player. Alex Life's an amazing guitar player. Check them out. It's Rush. Thank y'all for listening. I really appreciate it. I loved this one. It was really great. Great topic. I enjoyed covering it. And again, let us know if you want to hear anything else, or if you have an idea. Shout out my buddy Mike Norman. He always comes up with some great podcast ideas. I was just looking at one of his messages the other day. It's coming, Mikey. But again, thank you all for listening, and check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. Hit us up on our Twitter or Instagram at @thebigmarkpod or @thebigmarkpodcast. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Rate the podcast. Share the podcast. Love your friends. Love your family. And check Rush out. Peace.